Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hello if you're watching us online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the head of studio here. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a very fetching pink hoodie today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, offering you the chance to spend some time in our space, hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. An especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, quite a few today. Hello, welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England, but also by generous donations from members of the public, just like yourselves. More on that later. We offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a place for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So just a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of water. If you want to take a break at any point, there's a quiet space just next to this room. So to my left, your right, around the corner there, there's a little door. There's a room in there with some sofas and bean bags, and it's fairly well soundproofed. So if you want to take a break, you can pop in there. We're not expecting a fire drill today. If you hear a fire alarm, that is probably real. The fire exits are at the other end of the studio, again, my left, your right, on either side, but in any event, the studio team will direct you towards them, should we need them. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change, over there in the kitchen, in the corridor next to the kitchen. Not in the kitchen next to the corridor. Please do not use the kitchen as a bathroom. There'll be a Q&A at the end of this talk. For those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautem is here. He will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please raise your hand and I'll send around a microphone. That is not for us here in the room. That is for the folks at home so they can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio, at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right, our speaker for today is Julia Scott-Stevenson. Julia is a researcher and maker of immersive media based at University of Technology, Sydney, formerly of UE Bristol and the Digital Cultures Research Centre. Her work explores how collectively engaging with immersive artworks informs our perception of climate crisis and our feelings of agency. Today she's going to talk about her project Collective Visions and Future Echoes, exploring how it feels to encounter a virtual holographic human relating their climate story, and how can the materiality of inhabiting augmented space support and enhance connectedness with a desirable future. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome back to Julia.
Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see you all here. As Martin said, I'm Julia Scott-Stevenson. I'm currently a researcher and maker at UTS in Sydney, but about 5 years ago, I finished up 3 years based here at the studio with Digital Cultures Research Centre at UE. So it really is very special to be back here and see some old and new faces. So yes, I'm really looking forward to sharing my work with you. So as Martin said, my research fellowship at UTS is called Envisaging and Enacting Just Climate Futures. And it actually builds on work I started here at UE and with the studio as part of the Southwest Creative Technology Network, where I was interested in how can we use immersive technologies and media experiences to get audiences thinking through climate crisis. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about climate crisis. And sometimes I like to describe it as a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, it's this overwhelming, complex, wicked, knotty problem that we cannot even conceive of entirely, let alone figure out a way to deal with. And then at the other end of the spectrum, it's this hyper-individual, it's all up to you, what actions are you taking, why haven't you bought an electric vehicle yet, kind of thing. And I'm interested in where's that point in the middle that enables us to feel like we have some kind of agency in this space, that we can do something without feeling like it's entirely up to us and that we're not achieving what we should be achieving. And there's a lot of people talking about this, and many people who are more firmly engaged in this kind of climate collective action space do think that one of the answers here is collective action and engaging in communities and partnering with other people. And so I'm interested in exploring that through immersive forms of media. And I've purposely used the fairly vague term immersive media because part of the research is actually figuring out what kinds of immersive media might help support this. So I am interested in forms like virtual reality, but I'm focusing my efforts a little more on forms that can be a bit more easily collective, where multiple audience members can do the work at the same time. So I'm going to take you through a couple of projects that I've been working on that have explored this. And the first one is called Collective Visions. And it ran during Climate Action Week, Sydney, in 2024. And this, what you can see here is what's called the data arena at UTS. And it's a big 360-degree screen room. And audiences would walk into the space, and what you can't see is on one side, there was a QR code and some instructions, and audiences would scan the QR code, bring up a browser on their phone, where they were invited to craft a prompt explaining what their hoped-for climate future looks like. We would use a generative AI system, and it would generate an image in about 10 seconds. And if they liked that image, they could hit submit, and it would appear on the walls around them. And this was a kind of slowly growing collage across the 5 days of Climate Action Week. So that, I think, is the end of day one in the top left. And then bottom right is where we got to at the end. And we might just look at a short video. So I worked with visualization designer Thomas Ricciardiello to build this. And there were kind of two main focuses. One was around social research, so looking at the collection of images that were created, the prompts behind them, and seeing what kinds of futures people can imagine. And then the second element of it was I wanted to see if there was actually an element of the collective experience of participating in this project that itself contributed to this discourse of agency. So does participating in an activity like this and seeing that other people also have visions of a possible future contribute to audiences feeling like they might be a part of something that helps them in the face of climate doom? So on questions 1 and the themes, I haven't quite finished crunching the data yet, but there are definitely some interesting themes emerging. At the beginning of the week, people were generally being kind of good students and coming up with prompts that you can probably expect. So things like a lot of greenery on buildings, solar panels and so on. But as the week went on, images started to get a little more abstract, a little more creative, and people were kind of riffing off each other and getting a bit more off-piste. We had a lot of bees. People really like bees. Mycelium and mushroom houses. People were imagining like residential areas built out of mushrooms. We had some really lovely kind of hybrid human-plant creatures and so on. I think this one with the pandas was one of my media students who was imagining like the animals are fighting back. So I think they're going to set fire to us all, I'm not sure. And then this one, I don't know if you can see, but there's a sort of illustrated image of men in suits all crying, and that was, I think, oil executives after fossil fuels have been banned. And this one over here that I really loved, that's kind of a circular Earth-style shape covered in windows and greenery, that was a one-word prompt, and it was degrowth. Now, we also made space for whatever people were wanting to write. We didn't censor any of the images. There's always a little bit of silliness that goes on with AI, so I was interested to see how that would come through, and there were a couple of people that kind of were not following the prompts and just devising whatever they wanted, which was fine. We left all of that up. And there were also people who quite validly did not have a hopeful vision of the future. And so we had a few images of apocalypse and those kinds of things coming through, and we wanted to be sure that we left space for that as well. But it was interesting to see that across the spread, in general, there was a really lovely, richly diverse set of things that people were imagining might be possible. And so importantly, the prompt was not what do you think is going to happen, but it's what do you want? It's actually kind of an intentional, what would you like to see? There's something about talking about futures that can be a little bit unmoored. It sometimes needs a bit of a framework to connect it to something. And suggesting that any of this is trying to predict a future is certainly not the purpose. And I'm not claiming that any individual image holds any kind of truth. Most of us have probably played a little bit at least with some generative AI, and to nobody's surprise, it's still a little bit shit. The images that come out, no one is amazingly predictive of what's happening, but what was interesting was that in context, with a lot of them in one place, that experience of feeling, oh, there's a lot of different ideas here, and a lot of different people have a range of rich visions on where we might go. That, I think, was the interesting outcome. The process itself is really revealing. A lot of people commented that it was really difficult coming up with something they want to see. We all know how to describe the apocalypse. We see it in popular media. We see it already happening around us in the real world. But saying what you want to see is actually harder. There's that kind of terror of a blank page, and it also involves a bit of vulnerability. It involves baring your soul a little bit to describe what you want. And so using generative AI, in some ways it shortcuts that difficulty of articulation, because we had supporting guiding questions. You could see other people's prompts rolling up the screen as well. There was a bit of a game that emerged where people were trying to match the prompt to the image and seeing what they could connect up. And so that offers some of that framework that we need to come up with an idea. And the collective approach of being there in space with others, seeing other images, that goes some way to reducing a little bit of that vulnerability, to feeling a bit supported to coming up with an idea. And there's a very low barrier to participation. If people didn't have a smartphone, we had some spares that we could offer around, but generally the majority of the people had one that they could use. And I'd been thinking about a project like this for a long time, since before generative AI was a thing, but people are very often reticent to contribute something that is considered creative. A lot of people think they're not creative. They think, oh, I can't draw a picture or write a story. But Gen AI is a really neat shortcut to allowing people to quickly come up with something representative. So I hope that this in some way kind of contributes to a kind of collective imagination and a feeling that there are others who have some hopeful idea of a future. Now, I know many of you are probably sitting there going, climate project, generative AI, there's a tension here. I promise I will get to that. But first, I'm just going to skip ahead to the project that I'm working on at the moment, which is called Future Echoes. And I'm working on it in collaboration with creative technologist Matt Hughes. Now, in this project, audience members don mixed reality glasses. I've got a set of them here that I can show you. So they're glasses like this, mixed reality glasses, so meaning there's clear lenses, you can see the space around you, you can see people who are in the space with you, but you can also see additional media projected into the lenses of the glasses. And these attach to an Android phone that you can put in your pocket or have with you while you're wearing them. And if we have prototyped it usually with 2 people, sometimes 3, doing it at the same time, each with a set of glasses. and all those people can see the same additional content mapped to the same area. So if, for instance, a couple of us are wearing the glasses and there's a holographic person over here, we can all see them standing in the same spot. And the audience members encounter volumetric recordings of Australian women talking about their experiences in climate action. Now, these envisioned futures are revealed through generative AI, again in the prototype, 3D point clouds that appear behind them. And so audience members can walk around the space, walk around the volumetric women, and walk around the point clouds. So these images are of us recording the volumetric interviews. And so what I mean by that is we've got a regular camera, a traditional 2D camera at the front for kind of record data. And then we've got 3 depth cameras set up. So they might be a little tricky to see, but there's a small one here in front of the main camera. There's one in the back left there, and there's another one in the back right that's blocked by this camera here. You can sort of see it in that image over there. And it's sending out a depth, time of flight is what it's called, a bit like LiDAR, and capturing the depth of these women. And then we project those into the glasses so you can see a 3D person in space with you. Over here on the left, we have Lee Constable. She's a children's author, science communicator. She has a drag king alter ego called Milton Mango, who talks to Australian men about climate and toxic masculinity. And this is Arietta Rika. She's Australian, Fijian, Tongan, and she's a poet, and she read some of her poetry for us in the piece. And we have a few other women that we spoke to as well. Alana, who's awed by the intricacy and detail of a tiny bug. Nadoka, who sees the challenge ahead as one of embracing the messiness of nature. Danusha, who cares really deeply about bringing minority communities along on the ride to resilience. And Devlina, who brings decades of on-the-ground experience to her insights. Let's look at a short video that was just a bit of testing on the generated backgrounds and how we would add depth to them and drop them into the space. So this is Alana. So we generated, these are just test images in the backgrounds, they're not the ones we used in the final piece. And we tested generating 2D images with AI and then adding a depth map so that they become kind of like 2.5D effectively in the final piece. These stills are from the project at the moment. Some of them took to the depth really well, like this one with the apples is in a long kind of alley, works really nicely. Something that moves away to a distant point is really great. And the aesthetic of the women, we wanted to be kind of purposely a little bit glitchy. So we ended up leaving a lot of this kind of pixelation that you can see. We weren't trying to represent them in fully high definition human form. We wanted it to feel like they were virtual people. We didn't want to get too close to that kind of slightly uncanny valley weird experience of having a person in space with you. And for the prototype, we've used these generative AI images, and we showed that at a festival in Sydney called Vivid in June this year. But for the next iteration, we're stripping out the AI. That was just a prototyping tool, and we're going to be engaging a 3D artist to build out some more backgrounds for us. And again, I'll go back into that in a moment in relation to the AI. These are some images from the showcase, the festival in June. So there was a lot to learn from putting it in front of an audience and seeing how people experienced the work. Almost no one had used glasses like this before, which was not surprising. And then there was a real range of experience in terms of whether people had experienced VR or some other kind of immersive media versus whether they were really fresh to it. There was a really stark difference between kids and adults. Older people who hadn't used technology like this at all, often you kind of had to walk up behind them and go, "You can look around." And then they'd sort of go, "Oh, wow, there's a person over here." And this is my kids actually trying it out. And they were leaping through point clouds and trying to hit things in trees. And one of my daughters tried to eat one of the apples that was floating in air. So they were kind of really primed to physically explore the space. And so one of the things that I'm also interested in with this is why and how do we use physical space and our bodies to experience media of this kind? What does it feel like to physically stand in front of another human who takes up life size and is addressing you? One of the interesting things we observed is that people tend to, and this is generally no matter what their experience with immersive technology, they tend to treat virtual people with the kind of respect they treat a real live human. So if people were going to walk around and kind of poke their head into point clouds and move around behind the person and go, "Do they have a back of the head?" fairly quickly they would then revert to kind of standing at an appropriate distance and be spoken to by that person. It often feels kind of rude to be walking around behind someone while they're speaking, or certainly rude to walk through them while they're speaking. And for the prototype, we hadn't set up directional sound yet. So the sound was all just coming from one speaker on the side. So you couldn't use the sound to find where the next person was. And each time someone started speaking, they were in a different location. So there was a bit of, okay, there's a new person, where are they? And often the other person in there would like tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oh, I found them, they're over here." But fairly often someone would realise they were standing in the person, and every time they would be like, "Oh my God," and get out, even though it's just this kind of point cloud. And even myself, knowing what I know, that these are entirely fictional points in space, when Matt and I were setting up the project and we would be positioning women and deciding where we wanted them to be in the room, and we'd say, "Okay, we're going to put Alana over here," and then Matt would say, "All right, I'm going to move Ari from here to here," and every time I would get out of the way so that Ari could move through. And it just seems to be this thing that we do when we encounter these virtual people. It didn't start out as a project specifically about women, but it kind of emerged into that over time. And there's an Australian social researcher called Rebecca Huntley, and she does a lot of work taking the temperature of communities on their feelings around climate action, their role, their agency, and so on. And she says that, having surveyed many, many thousands and thousands of Australian people, unsurprisingly, the most authoritative people that we respect on climate communication is climate scientists. Those are the people that we trust the most. The second most trustworthy people on climate communication is young women. And she has a lot of different theories about why this is the case. Many a sceptical uncle or father has been won over by their daughter kind of fairly vociferously explaining to them why they should be on the right side of this. And when I started reading about that, I just decided to kind of lean into that and go with women as my messengers here. They're not all young women, but that's also kind of just how it emerged and the people that I came across. So there's a few plans for the next iteration now that we've shown the prototype a few times. And one of the main elements that I want to figure out is the interactive part at the end. Currently, it's about a 10-minute documentary. You hear these 6 women throughout that 10 minutes and you can walk around the space. What we've done some tests on now is Matt and I have set up the depth cameras during the experience of the piece, and then with us as the participants, projected ourselves into the project at the end. And I wonder if there's something about seeing our virtual selves in this possible future with these generated backgrounds about what this possible future might look like with the other characters might be something kind of impactful, I think. The other question I have that I haven't quite figured out yet is, what is the materiality of being in this space with these other people? When we were doing this live test, of capturing ourselves and projecting ourselves into this space. One thing I didn't do, but wish that I had done, was reach out and touch Matt on the shoulder. And I wonder if feeling something material and physical in that space as well might help to connect us to each other, to the story, and to that potential future. There are also, being immersive and XR, there's always 10,000 things you could possibly do with the project. And talking to other people, there's also all kinds of possibilities around going for something non-linear, breaking it down so that the women have their own positions and there's a presence trigger where as you approach them, you get to hear their story and you can choose who you want to hear in which order, which is a possibility. But at the moment, I think something's kind of holding me to some level of linear documentary here, at least for the beginning part, before we get to the interaction at the end. My background is documentary, traditional screen documentary, and then interactive and immersive documentary. So I think grounding it in that space is probably where I'm going to sit for now. There's also possible options in the future for a projection version. So at the moment, we've got 6 pairs of the glasses. So in terms of charging and so on, we can probably run 4 people at a time, but it might be nice to set it up in a space where we could project the women onto the walls and have bigger numbers of people come through. So, on the AI. When I was generating the images for the backgrounds, we started out trying out verbatim text from what the women were saying. So actually just plugging exactly their words into an engine and seeing what we came back with. And Alana has this lovely story about when she was a kid walking with her mother, and her mum would always stop whenever they saw a really cool bug and point out the kind of intricacy and amazing level of detail and complexity that nature achieves. And I put those words in and I got these images, which I found quite lovely, and I also found them slightly unexpected compared to a lot of other generated AI work that I had come up with. But after that, we didn't have so much luck. A lot of the stuff that we came up with was fairly generic. Certainly if I was putting anything in to do with Arietta's storytelling around Fiji and Tonga, it absolutely could not do cultural specificity. It makes a pretty good facsimile of cultural specificity, which is possibly even more problematic to some extent, because a lot of people would look at those outputs about Fiji and go, oh yeah, that looks kind of Fijian, I guess. But if you know anything about Fijian culture, it was really, really not accurate at all. So we had to move right away from any of those kinds of words of Aries and go much more generic on kind of Pacific beach style outputs. And we did get some really great outputs as well. This one was Professor Devlina Ghosh talking about the end of capitalism. And I mean, if we are going to have an end of capitalism, maybe it will look like that. And this one also takes to the depth algorithm really nicely. It kind of comes at you in a particular way. But all the way through, I was feeling a little bit icky about using this generative AI. I was trying to be very light touch with it. I decided at the beginning I wasn't going to go down rabbit holes of generating thousands and thousands of images to get the right one. I was just going to be pretty quick about it, take the first few and pick something from there. But all the way along I was kind of thinking to myself, or probably, if I'm honest, beating down the thought that, am I just not paying a 3D artist to do this work? And after we showed the prototype, Matt sat me down and said, I don't want to work with AI anymore, and I don't think we should. And to be honest, I couldn't argue with him because I'd been having all of the same thoughts. For him, it was a lot about the labour issues. He had a lot of friends who were 3D artists. He was worried we're going to be losing work. About the copyright issues, he was saying, you know, we've got these images, where do they come from? Who made them? How do we cite them? And I think the line he used was, I feel like I'm on the wrong side of the picket line. And so I agreed, and we've decided that from now on, moving forward, we won't be using AI. It was an excellent prototyping tool. It is going to take us time to find funding to get a 3D artist on board, but I think that's the right thing to do for this particular instance. And of course, what I haven't mentioned yet is the environmental impact of these tools. Now, for a project like Collective Visions, bringing audiences into space and doing that generation, I still think that that's actually a valuable use of these kinds of tools. It was a particular tool that served a very specific purpose in that instance that allowed people to generate something quickly, and I think that that makes sense. But then moving into future echoes, I didn't really see a good justification for it in this case. There's a writer and researcher, Eric Salvaggio, that does a lot of work on this, looking into AI. He's an artist who uses AI, but he uses it very intentionally, and he interrogates a lot all of these bigger picture issues around it, the labour questions, the environmental questions. He's done some kind of back of the envelope analyses based on the kind of patchy information that's available that compares Gen AI energy intensity with other art forms. So he says, for instance, a ceramicist firing an electric kiln for 5 hours works out as about 9,300 image generations. Or if you leave a whole bunch of music and photos just sitting on cloud storage for ages, that's about as much energy as creating about 20,000 images. Now, he's not proposing this, and neither am I, as a get-out-of-jail-free card that means, well, hey, now we can go to town and make as much as we want because everybody else is using energy too. But he is just pointing out that everything we do has some kind of impact, and as long as we are intentional about that and aware of it, then that's the kind of first step to figuring out whether you actually want to engage with these tools or not. I'm also generally interested in AI as a research question more broadly. So my previous work has looked at data privacy and surveillance and digital cultures. And so the intersections here are really relevant. I think also if we go on to find a 3D artist, that will give us a little more control as well. So we can be quite specific in the outputs that we want. We can augment size and shape a lot more easily. We can get a bit of movement into those images, which obviously we could also do with AI, but that would be even more energy intensive again. And there's other things that we could work with a little bit. We could do a little bit of LiDAR scanning. We could play with some Gaussian splatting as well to build out those images. So when I work on this next year, I'm also planning to do more of an audience survey. Our observations so far have been fairly anecdotal in terms of how people experience the space and move around. And we've got some more work to do on some of the stability using volumetric capture and augmented reality with glasses like this. There's also some restrictions. I mean, the field of vision, for those of you that have tried other mixed reality glasses like HoloLens maybe or Magic Leap, the field of vision's not huge, but it's not bad. It's quite good. And I'm kind of willing to take that in place of a VR headset, which you can do pass through, and so that means seeing the world outside you as well as laying media over the top. But it still really restricts your own vision, and you don't have your peripheral vision. It's a bit harder to see the people around you. And I really quite like the affordances of these glasses, which mean you're still very embedded in the space that you're in. You can still really experience that world around you. You can speak to the people that are there with you a bit more easily. You can see their eyes fairly easily. And so we just need to do a little bit more work on stability, on markers, a few other bits and pieces to kind of to bed that down a little bit. So I do have 2 pairs of the glasses here, and so if anyone is interested in trying it out after this talk, I can set it up and I'll have a few slots for people to have a go if anyone would like to. So we'll probably do it in this space as well. This is just a very brief earlier piece of LiDAR scanning that was very much kind of just some testing of capturing urban wilds in my local space, which was kind of reference points feeding into this work actually. Like, how do we retrieve and support urban wilds in urban spaces? And so this is a kind of much, the LiDAR scanning used here is just on an iPhone Pro, and now there's been a few advances which make it a lot easier to build out the edges around that, particularly with Gaussian splatting as well. So something like this is also a possibility for how we might bring in other kinds of backgrounds and anchor the piece to the physical space around us. So a final note on why I like to, and my dad can sit and watch us while we talk about humans in nature. One of the other things I'm trying to explore with all of these projects is questioning this binary, this artificial binary that we have, that society has, which is humans in here, nature out there. So, you know, we are not part of nature. Nature is something green and wild that we go and visit occasionally. And so I'm interested in with layering virtual and mixed reality onto space, whether we can address that a little bit and find that that sense of permeability. Remind ourselves that we are actually constantly in connection with nature. We are nature, we're part of it. So, like my dad here, we absorb vitamin D from the sun through our skin, we take in bacteria, we cough, we spread it elsewhere, we take in food, we excrete waste, we menstruate. We're constantly engaged in exchanges with the world around us. And maybe allowing some, this goes back to actually why I like that kind of glitchy aesthetic for the characters in the space, is that in some ways that's signposting a little bit of that permeability, that we're not these fixed enclosed boxes that move around the world and then take ourselves out of it every now and then when we want to. We have this continual sense of exchange. And so I'm hoping that I can kind of encourage people to experience that and consider that. So questions I still have are this, you know, why are we in that space together with other people? Is it that we just hold the hand of another person and have that small moment of exchange right then? I think I could keep talking about this for a while, but how about I open to questions if anyone has any?
All right, thank you very much, Julia. Do we have any questions from the audience? Sam?
That bit you were saying at the end as well about nature and inhabiting. Did you try anything with, you set it up in a space and it looked like it was in a fairly generic room. Did you try anything with it actually people using the interactive experience but outdoors in a kind of more natural nature space, like a garden or something?
It's a really nice idea that I've thought about definitely. We haven't tried it yet. It would be great to. We need a PowerPoint, but I guess that's not impossible to be somewhere vaguely near a natural experience. And so, yeah, that would be a really nice possibility for how we could actually connect. And I had thought about maybe some of that materiality is physically connecting with a plant, a tree, something like that in that space. There's a really lovely VR piece called On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World, which is actually about nuclear proliferation, but at the end, it's a single user piece, but you hold hands with all the virtual characters in the space and you're outdoors in this really lovely Pacific environment. So yeah, it's something I'd like to explore. I would need to do some testing on the light levels, because it could be...
How do the glasses work in that sort of light and, it's a really bright sunny day, I guess.
So they work, a real sun probably wouldn't work, but you could do a reasonably shady spot, I suspect. Yesterday I was testing out the Snap spectacles, which are like another version, and they operate quite differently. They don't have lenses, they do kind of light point projections or something. And for something like that, that really wouldn't work. But for something like this, it could actually be possible if you could play around with lower light. So yeah, it'd be worth looking into.
Any other questions? Go on.
Hi, thanks, Julia. I wondered if you'd had any issues with like eyeline with the video capture, because presumably there's a fixed point of, the participants you've captured, and then you're placing, and then audiences can move around. So has that been an issue? Are the ways you've tried to address that? I'd just be interested.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I was really worried about in the recording phase, because I was thinking, if the eye line is just a little bit off and you can never quite get in front of this person, then that's going to feel a little bit weird. And so I was kind of really hugging this depth camera and kind of putting myself right on top of it and trying to make sure they were talking to me. Ultimately, in the end, I actually don't think it mattered as much as I was worried about, partly to do with the sense that as you walk around them, it's slightly glitchy enough that it's not 100% clear if they are directly speaking to you or if they're going over your shoulder. One thing actually that we have noticed with eyeline though is people really want the heads to be at the same height as them. We spent a lot of time trying to line them up with the floor so that they didn't look like they were floating and that their feet were flat on the floor. Turns out what we should have done was actually, people aren't worried about them floating off the ground, but they want them about head height. That was often the experience. Devlina, for instance, is sitting in a chair while we speak to her, so that's going to be an interesting question about whether we really make her float so that she can kind of address people a bit more closely. So, but also, yes, as you walk around, they're not following you, so there is kind of a general point of address they have. People do tend to kind of want to come within a bit of a bound of this mode of address, but it hasn't been as much of an issue as I had worried. I suspect if we got much more high fidelity, then it might start to be a little clearer that they're looking in a particular way. But so far, it's actually, it's more about the height and their position in space around you that seems to be what people are interested in.
And then, if you've got different height participants, that obviously causes some challenges, I imagine. Because does it track with the glasses, or are they in space and then the user has to adjust?
Yeah, so I guess we would have to assume or make a judgment on what we think our average height for a user is going to be, because then the characters will be fixed once we decide that. So if we bring everyone up, we don't want to bring them too high, and then if we get a bunch of shorter people, they'll be over. So I think we will go not too much over that, which is sort of why we also went with, all right, well, let's go with their feet on the ground, and then there's a bit of variety there. But generally, it doesn't seem to matter too much where they end up that way.
Hello. I was just thinking about where you started the talk, Julia, and talking about this sense of somewhere in between, it's all on my shoulders and I'm getting it wrong and I'm completely powerless, to the inevitability of collapse, and how that had played a part in your kind of interaction design, that the sort of levels of agency that you're wanting to inspire in people and how that relates to the experiences in particular.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I think about a lot and I still don't have a really good answer for, other than there's a lot of, coming from a documentary background, there's a lot of documentary media, particularly 2D, feature docs, TV docs, that are very much about a call to action. And at the end, there's maybe a link or some kind of specific action or suggestion of what you can do next. And I decided with this reasonably early on that I wanted to go more towards the sense of contributing to what one of my colleagues likes to call the socio-ecological imagination. So it's kind of more generally contributing to this sense that you are part of something and there is a community out there that you can engage with. So I'm certainly not trying to suggest a list of things that people can do, but a lot of that framing comes in where I show the work and then what the surrounding scaffolding with it is. So for instance, when I showed Collective Visions at Climate Action Week, it turns out that people who were coming to participate in that, they really did want to have conversations about what can I do? That was the kind of the framing of the work. And so we lent into that and we really did have a lot of conversations with participants about other events that were on during the week, other things they could go and sign up for, groups they could join and participate in. And then for something like Future Echoes, there's definitely more that I can do to think about in that part 2, what is that interactive element, and then what's the offboarding? And whether that interactive element is its own offboarding or whether there's another stage afterwards, which might be completely analog, and it might be come into a room afterwards and write yourself a postcard that you imagine to your 5 years in the future self, and make some kind of commitment to what you want to be part of. Something like that is all ideas that we're tossing around at the moment. I want to have it both ways. I want to be the artist that kind of says, this is a contribution to thinking and ideas without having to have some concrete output. But also, if it could help us figure out some steps towards climate change, that'd be really great too. I know that's a huge ask. So I try not to kind of throw all the eggs into one basket of how to do that. But yeah, that's a very roundabout way of saying I don't have a good answer, but I'm still thinking about it.
Thank you.
This is like a two-parter from two people. How do you navigate the energy use landscape for projects that use AI, and how is that use communicated with project participants?
Yeah, so energy use for a project like this, something that we looked into when we were still thinking that we were going to use the Gen AI images, we did a bit of research into setting up our own models, taking them offline, running them independently. We looked into solar batteries to be able to power some of that as well. So that's some of the explorations that we did. And we'll still, like, all of that is really useful learning that I might take into future projects. But now that we've decided to move away from AI for this one, then that's less kind of vital. We put a note on, when we showed this prototype version at Vivid, we did have a kind of poster up where I outlined some of these thoughts and said, these are some of the strategies we've been taking. Happy to chat with anyone who's interested when they come to it. And similarly with collective visions, at the time actually we didn't have any messaging around it, but if I was doing that again, I would certainly add some of that information. And it's something I'm continuing to do some of that research into. There's more and more research coming out continually about the energy implications of these systems. So I think that's something I'd like to look into a little bit more and share on that.
Great, thanks.
I think we had a question down here.
The idea of, it seems a one-way dialogue really with the people in space. I just think is a way of the people in space, real people. If you can communicate with them and they can communicate back with you, it's more of a one-to-one.
That would be really interesting, actually. There are projects that do that. It would be a huge undertaking to build something like that. There was a really fantastic piece called Testimony that interviewed a range of Holocaust survivors about their experiences and interviewed them volumetrically and did hours and hours of interviews with these people about all sorts of things to do with their experiences in their lives. And then they built effectively a chatbot out of those answers and made volumetric characters that you could then interact with and you could interview them about their experiences. Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. It would be huge in scope to undertake, but one possible alternative would be allowing that audience choice through using some kind of presence trigger where, for instance, if I set up all 6 of my attendees, of my subjects at once and let audiences go and hear more from whomever they chose to hear more from. Because, I mean, I also had that classic documentary dilemma of 6 interviews, we've got close to 6 hours of content and it's a 10-minute piece. Now, obviously not all of that content needs to be delivered to the audience, but there are certainly other elements that I've had to cut out that I would have loved to keep back in. And so if I could kind of recreate a few of them and have, okay, maybe you want to come and revisit Devlina and hear some more from her about the end of capitalism, allowing that to come out in a kind of alternative section would be interesting.
Thank you for the talk. That was awesome. I was interested in what you said about the kind of need to make something that's artistic and reflective and kind of open, and how that kind of sometimes is in sort of conflict with the need for kind of a feeling of like measuring the impact that you're having. I look a lot at how environmental issues are represented in VR, and something that frustrates me a lot is how it's often framed as this quite mechanistic thing of like, how can we change people, or how can we kind of make them do better? And I really like what your work's doing, which is seems much more of a conversation and kind of opening things up. I guess I was wondering, I know you said you didn't have a perfect answer for that kind of balance between artist artistic endeavours versus impact. But I was wondering if you did have any more thoughts about it, or kind of what you're looking at as a kind of in between those two things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that might flow into kind of what that part 2 is, that kind of offboarding as well, potentially, because in actual fact, from my understanding of research in climate action and individual climate action is, yes, we can absolutely all have impact with personal choices, but really the biggest impact we can all have is democratic participation mostly. And so that is something that we could speak to in a kind of final stage like that. I have a lot of research alerts set up, and I get these papers periodically, which is, a lot of it might be, we tested this VR piece on 20 students, and then we made them watch a flat screen version of the same thing, and then we asked them how they felt about trees. And they were more interested in trees after the VR piece, say. And I don't have a good articulate answer for why that leaves me a little bit cold, but that's sort of not what I'm trying to do to some extent. And I really don't want to set up a survey that says, do you like trees more now that you've done my piece than just by watching a documentary? Because I think that's kind of missing the point a little bit. So, yeah, I don't know, but I am still trying to, and it is, as an academic, it's something I have to articulate in writing, and so there will be more outputs where I really do dig into this, and I will have to look at some of those papers and go, okay, why is it that it makes me feel a bit ick? I need to be a bit more clear on, you don't get to just say, no, I don't like the sound of that. So I'm going to have to do some more rigorous teasing out of what my intentions are here. But there's a hugely long history of art being shown to have impact in ways that are much more elusive and abstract than those kind of really instrumental studies. So yeah, I'm still figuring that out, but I'm always happy to chat to people about that question because it's an ongoing concern.
Thanks. Can I ask a very quick follow-up to that?
Yeah.
So I'm actually doing a PhD in this, and something that I've really struggled with is that I feel trapped in that literature that you were just describing, which I really absolutely despise, to be honest, because for the reasons that you just described. And I was wondering if you are aware, basically, of any other kind of spheres of thinking that are kind of out there being written about in the literature at the moment, because I really can't find them.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to also continue this chat
Awesome.
later. We can definitely dig into this, but briefly, the phrase I mentioned before, the socio-ecological imagination, there are actually there are definitely science communicators going down comparing the two forms and ticking boxes, but there are also science communicators that are leaning into the sociology a little bit and talking about creating imaginaries of the future. And there are a couple of different papers that talk about the different imaginaries of where we think we're going to. So a lot of us subscribe to one or more of these imaginaries, and some of them, broadly, they are things like, so the techno-fix imaginary is that, technology will save us. There's a future here where geoengineering is going to solve everything and I don't need to worry. There's the sustainable lifestyles imaginary, which is, we just need to grow our own veg and have a backyard allotment and that will be fine. There's the we're all doomed imaginary, and a couple of others around the edge of that. So there is some research that goes into those and that talks about where do we fit in these spaces, how do we contribute to one or more of them that we would like to see expand or become more rigorous, I guess, and then there's another branch, and I'm looking at Paul Clark here, who works in this sort of space of the kind of connecting futures to now. How do we talk about futures in a way that brings us back and grounds us in the now and gives us something tangible to connect to and go, okay, I can see how what we're doing here right now connects to that future that I'm talking about. So there's a bit of that area as well that's worth having a look at.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Any last questions from the audience? We'll go here first.
Yeah, I was asking, but you said earlier that you were looking into doing projections instead of the mixed reality on the wall. Do you mean like 2D projections? And I was wondering, how it's going to be less immersive and how your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so when we first did these interviews and capturing them volumetrically, I didn't actually yet know what the output was going to be. I was interested in volumetric capture for that kind of texture and weight to a person, but I wasn't yet sure how we were going to deliver them. There is phone-based augmented reality, which kind of meets a need at the moment, but I don't love it for mediating everything through a phone. There was VR, of course, but I was hesitant to use the headsets and isolate people. And I didn't know if any of the glasses available were really going to cut it. And so initially I was actually thinking maybe screen projections were going to be the way to go. So yes, they are two-dimensional, but you still can kind of see a little bit. They seem to take on a kind of weight that visually at least is different from a traditionally captured 2D image. So it's not as good as what we then discovered the glasses. Matt actually had them from a previous project and hadn't been sure what to do with them, and we were like, oh, let's give them a try and see if it'll do. And then we were like, oh, this is something. Let's go with this. But to bring more people into space, I do think it could still work. Potentially even in a space like the data arena, and then it's a 360 space. You've got really good control of the lights and the sound, and to have someone life-size on a screen, I think is still quite impactful in a way that's different from a traditional 2D screen.
Yeah. One last question, if anyone has one. Michael, be quick.
A very quick one. One of the things that strikes me about imagining the future is what people allow themselves to imagine. Mm-hmm. So have you thought about how you break people's internal boundaries about hopefulness, about what they can get involved in? Particularly, you talk about the participatory democracy, mm-hmm. but also then other actions like direct action or campaign groups. Have you thought about how you could impact that sort of opening of their possible actions themselves?
Yeah, so a lot of that is bringing them into contact with other people that are also thinking this. So hence a massive collective collage that shows you that, oh, other people have a bunch of other ideas. That's part of it. Possibly some kind of offboarding space where people get to write to themselves, think through what some of these options are, consider the variety of things available to them. Certainly with this, for instance, the framing really matters. And I think I mentioned that once already, like because we were in a Climate Action Week space, people were kind of primed to think about those specific outputs. Interestingly, we tried this again. We've done it a few times in this space and with the climate framing, and it usually works reasonably well in terms of the outputs being broadly towards what we are asking for. But we tried it at the showcase night as well. So when I was showing my Future Echoes project and a couple of my colleagues were showing VR work, the theme for that night broadly was dreams. What do you dream of? And we decided to set this up as well on a flat screen. So still a very large screen, but just a flat on one wall in the same room that people were doing a couple of VR pieces. And it went sideways pretty quickly. Like we had a few cats and then suddenly we had a lot of cats and a lot of Beyonce as well. And so, like the space that you're in, it really matters. So I think kind of the answer to that is priming people well, giving them a lot of options and a lot of ideas so they don't feel like they have to come up with it all themselves. And the rolling prompts of what other people had come up with was also really useful.
All right, I think that's probably all we have time for. So let's say thank you to Julia.
Thank you.
And we are going to set up some demos after this if anyone wants to play around, but give us 15 minutes or so to move some chairs and so on. All right, before you go, please don't forget that today is First Friday, our monthly social event. So from 5 till 7 p.m. today, you can come along to the studio, grab a drink, and explore some of the work that our community is making. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. We'll be happy to help. Studio team, give us a wave. Here we are. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. And as I said before, Watershed is a charity. If you would like to donate to us and help us keep offering great talks like this one, please go to watershed.co.uk/biggive. Up until Monday, your donations are being matched by a pool of generous donors as part of Big Give Week, so there's never been a better time to give us your money. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next time.